The brain is the most complex part in the human body. This 3-pound organ is responsible for our intelligence, interpreting sensation, initiating body movement, and controlling all of our behaviors. The brain and the rest of the central nervous system are composed of a variety of cells, but the primary function unit is a cell called a neuron. All sensations, movements, memories, and feelings are results of signals that pass through neurons of differing shapes, sizes, and functions. The average brain contains 80 to 90 billion neurons, the cell bodies of which form gray matter. The brain is a masterpiece of God's miraculous creation, yet over time, the many factors that impact brain development and steps that can be taken to reverse some of the factors contributing to an aging brain. Dr. Timothy Jennings has been in private practice as a Christian psychiatrist and certified master psychopharmacologist since 1997. Board certified in psychiatry by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, he is a specialist in transcranial magnetic stimulation, a drug-free treatment for depression. He spent more than 2 decades researching the interface between biblical principles and modern brain science, and is a highly sought-after lecturer and international speaker and the author of The God-Shaped Brain, The God-Shaped Heart, and The Aging Brain. He is in private practice in Chattanooga. You can find more about him at agingbrainbook.com or his ministry website, Come and Reason Together. comeandreason.com. Appearing here on the third Thursday of every month at the 10 o'clock hour is the author of The Aging Brain, Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Brain, our good friend, Dr. Timothy Jennings. Tim, good to see you, my friend.
Thanks for having me back, Eric.
Well, you're very welcome. I always look forward to this time because you and I get to talk about the things that aren't really in the Christian lexicon. People aren't talking about what you and I are talking about, but yet, like a mother, everybody has a brain.
Yes.
And we tend to address brain issues when there is a problem. It's something we take for granted. We don't realize that we're feeding it, nurturing it. We're supposed to be caring for it in the same manner as we care for the rest of our body. We seem to look at the brain as a separate entity. And you help us get focused on the fact that this is the center of all these other things that you desire. If the brain's not lined up with this system of goal setting, and I want to maintain wellness, and I want to do all these other things, if the brain's not on board, your body certainly cannot be on board. It's not a separate entity. It is actually the control center for all activities. So as we talk about this, you and I, each week, there's many branches of these discussions that we go into, and lately this concept of the impact of isolation in this COVID-19 world. We're facing a time where people are finding the stimulus that you and I have always talked about of keeping a healthy, active brain by keeping it stimulated and active and engaged and expanding so that it's not the opposite, atrophying and compressing. And these are the symptoms or the contributing factors to the dementias, the Alzheimer's, the conditions which cause us to have diminished capacities. And if we are honest with ourselves, none of us want to live a life of diminished capacity. But yet we are not doing the intentional things necessary because we don't look at the brain as being something that needs to be paid attention to. We tend to look at it when there's a problem, not in the preventative, feeding, nurturing, and acknowledging negative contributing factors to brain health. And that's part of our discussion today, is this impact of isolation on the brain and this disconnection from our typical social activities that have really been impacted since the middle of March and now are even eroding further as we're looking for more solutions to stem the spread of COVID-19.
Let me intervene here because there's something very important to share. and that is there's been several studies that have looked at socially connected people versus socially isolated people or disconnected people, and they look at the body's immune response, looking at white blood cells activity and gene expression in the white blood cells, and they actually discover multiple different genes are expressed differently in the groups that are connected socially versus those that are isolated. Particularly, they identified that the body's ability to fight viruses are improved when you're socially connected and are undermined when you're socially isolated. So these studies that look at just the body's immune side gene expression would suggest that if we isolate people, we are going to make them more vulnerable to being infected than if we allow them to stay socially connected. Put that together then with comparing rates of infection in societies that did extreme isolation or distancing versus societies like Sweden and Japan that didn't do it at all, and you will discover that the societies that are doing the distancing actually have higher rates of infection than the societies that didn't do the isolation, didn't do the mandatory quarantining of healthy people. In the history of the world, we've never really had situations where we have socially isolated people who were, quarantined people who were healthy. So this is a very strange dynamic that we're in, and notice what it's driven by. And this also goes back then to our immune response as well. It's driven by fear. What happens when we isolate, we actually cause people to not only feel disconnected, affecting the gene expression and immune response, we increase fear. When we're what mitigates against fear is when we're connected with people that care about us. If you think about soldiers in combat, what diminishes fear and allows them to deal with the stress of combat is that unit morale, that unit cohesion, that bond of brotherhood that they have, that connectedness with other people that care about them and they care about. That allows them to overcome their fears. They still have them, but they can overcome them. What happens when we break people down and isolate them is that their fears get magnified, and that causes function to be impaired, but it also impairs the body's immune response and makes us more vulnerable to illness. And then if we do get sick, we're less likely to be able to fight it off. So there is a certain logic in saying let's avoid each other so we don't get the germ, get the virus. But if you look at the landscape of our creation and our design and how we function, we actually function better when we're socially connected.
Is there medical science that says that, and I'm going to compare it to the Sequoia tree National Forest. The sequoia tree, the giant redwoods, the sequoias, have a cone, like a pine cone, that falls to the ground, it's shed to the ground. But in the course of normal events, it just lays there dormant until a fire comes along, and the heat of that fire, a naturally occurring event of a forest fire, not somebody with a campfire, but a naturally lightning strike, natural occurring, will create an environment where the heat tells the cone, open up and disperse your seeds. And that's when it occurs. It only occurs with a violent stimuli that will burn off underbrush, which is what is robbing nutrients from the root system and creating a fertile environment for these seeds to land in and then propagate and expand. So there is a catalyst, and it's a negative catalyst. We would look at that as a negative catalyst, but in nature it is a very positive catalyst to clear off an underbrush, clear off something which is a harmful environment to prepare a cleansed and nutrient-rich environment for these seeds to then take root. Our viruses, looking at the sovereignty of God, looking at the fact that pestilence is a part of the narrative throughout Scripture, are there positive aspects to society, to mankind, in not necessarily herd immunity, but and not to call the weak, and I'm not looking at it from that morbid side, but saying, are these things that keep a healthier population? Are these things that create more natural responses from the brain to release different chemicals, different.
So this is an interesting question you're really bringing up, Eric. And it's the tension that we as Christians understand since the fall exists between the forces of good and the forces of evil. They exist on a spiritual plane and they exist on a physical plane. Paul talks in the New Testament about how all nature groans under the weight of sin. There are forces that are loose on this earth today that were not loosed on this earth prior to Adam's fall. That are damaging and devastating to nature, that cause diseases and, as you say, pestilences. God did not create diseases and pestilences. These are corruptions of his design. Viruses, in my understanding, are not creations of God. They are perversions of God's creation. Human beings can actually take genetic material and can construct viruses. Just like a hacker can construct a virus for a computer, Microsoft or Apple, who makes the operating system, they don't put viruses in the system. Hackers will go in, malicious people, and they will construct viruses designed to disrupt the normal operations of the system. I think Satan is a malevolent being who is looking to hack God's systems, and viruses are part of that hack, that RNA, DNA hacks that are using materials, the code of that God built life upon, but to damage it. And so we have those elements, and then we have the healing aspects of God's creation working to overcome those infections. And so, yes, we see that tension. And so the Bible describes the process. Rejoice in your trials and tribulations, because it builds character. The law of exertion, we get stronger as we exercise. And so there's an aspect in the world in which we live that when we're confronted with a challenge or an obstacle or a difficulty, as we strive in God's grace to overcome, we can become stronger and more mature through that experience. And so there is an aspect to what you're saying that is part of that battle between good and evil that's true.
So, in looking at this, for the first time in recorded history, we're quarantining or isolating. We're
healthy
seeing,
people.
What's that? Healthy people.
Healthy people.
Healthy.
Not sick. We've
Right.
always quarantined the sick,
Right.
but now we're quarantining the healthy.
So this was a response to quote-unquote experts that said this is how you will stop the transmission of this virus.
This was the guess of experts. They call it an educated guess. If you listen to Fauci and Birx in almost every one of their news conferences, they will say our models are only good as the assumptions that they're based upon. When they were making all these predictions and models and recommendations, they were based on assumptions about the virus, assumptions about the death toll, assumptions about how it transmitted, assumptions about how long it lasted on surfaces, assumptions about whether masks would help or not help, assumptions. There's so many assumptions in this process that are still not fully elucidated and proved at this point. And so I think the motives for the recommendations have been consistently, by the vast majority, to try and benefit and help people, but it's a very narrow window of decision making. And the narrow window of decision making is, let's diminish the rate of COVID infection. Well, that doesn't consider the impact we have on isolation increasing domestic violence, isolation increasing suicide risk and rates, isolation increasing alcohol and drug abuse rates, isolation increasing poverty, isolation increasing nutrition problems in students who get their food at schools and aren't going to schools anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many cascading problems that are happening in society and to individuals and families that are not factored in to the overall landscape of the decision making on what's the best action to take, because it's a very narrow level of a decision making. We just want to diminish COVID transmission. That's it. Rather than saying, okay, COVID might happen, but if we do this, we diminish suicide rates and we diminish drug and alcohol and we keep families together and so forth. Those are not being weighed in.
So you're a scientist. You're a scientist that specializes in the brain. I have talked literally people off the cliff who are distraught and are isolated, and they can't make it to see their families, and they're prohibited from visiting a family member in the hospital. They're prohibited from attending a funeral. To have that closure in the process, that it has to be limited to 10 people, and travel.
This is destructive. This type of isolation is not healthy. And
So,
I'm going to throw in one more variable that I didn't share with you yet. When I was in the military, trained as a military psychiatrist, there was one battlefield environment that is proven to have the highest rate of psychiatric decompensation, and within days of the environment. And more than 50% of the soldiers can potentially have to leave the battlefield because of psychiatric decompensation, and that is a biological and chemical environment in which you have to wear a mask. And when you have to wear a mask and you're in a stressful environment, that mask isolates the person. Even if we can't speak because there's lots of noise around us, like in a battle, there's guns and bombs and things. If you can see the face of your friends and you can get the encouraging look, the expression on the face, I'm with you, you're not alone. It gives you resilience. But when you put the mask on and you break that facial connection, it accelerates the sense of isolation. So not only are we isolating, like can't go to funerals and can't get the social support that you've just mentioned, I have concerns about this mandated mask wearing that is going to heighten this sense of disconnect. And even when we're going out to do some of our daily activities, we're not breaking the sense of isolation, and we're not reducing our sense of fear. It's still cranking up fear. And as we crank up fear chronically, the science is very clear that chronic fear activates the stress circuitry, raises inflammatory cascades, increases all kinds of health problems, physical as well as mental health problems. So I just wanted to throw that variable in.
it's stunning to hear you say this. It used to be we could tell the good guys from the bad guys because they wore a mask.
Sure.
You wanted to hide the identity, and that was that instilled fear. You have a bank robbery. The bank robbers come into the bank. Their faces are disguised. They're masked. We equate that view with trouble, warning. Will Robinson, danger, Will Robinson. That's
sure. I remember that. Lost in Space.
Right. And so that's our response. Now today, the norm is that somebody with sunglasses, a black mask, is going to walk into your place of business, and that is the new norm. And we have to reprogram the brain to say, no, this is not
a threat.
It's not a threat. It's not an enemy. It's a friend, not a foe. That means I have to rewire my thinking. So what's going to happen when this ends and the masks come off? Do we go back to the bad guys wear masks, and we go back to a society that's not been indoctrinated into a mask and no facial identity? I went to vote the other day, and we had a runoff election here, and so you have to present them with your photo ID, but I had a mask on, and I had sunglasses on. So there's no way you could have looked at that photo ID and determined...
They didn't make you take your mask off to reveal your face?
Did not ask me to take my mask off. It was just, here, thank you, sign here, that was it. Never physically identified me as me.
I wonder, yeah, no. So the social isolation aspect, I just wonder if it's going to enhance that sense of anxiety and loneliness and isolation from people, and that drives more fear. And fear is antithesis to love. Perfect love casts out fear. As soon as Adam and Eve sinned, they ran and hid because they were afraid. Fear is the currency of the enemy. The enemy wants to incite fear because he can then manipulate people to take actions to protect self, even if it hurts another person.
You are such a clarion, crystal clear voice in this matter. And I'm going to ask you, um, have you reached out to the Foxes, Fox News? Have you reached out to any of the media outlets to say, I have a professional psychiatric perspective on this that I want to add to the narrative as you're starting to isolate people and do all these things? There's another area of impact. We're hearing from people I don't trust. Now, I'm not a vaccine person.
But this doesn't fit the narrative. What we're saying doesn't fit the narrative.
Well, that's exactly right, and I think it's time that we added. The problem is that.
But you assume that the people giving us the narrative wants, desire a perspective that we're giving. I think there's a lot of people in the big industry of our nation right now that have a narrative that they want to put forward, and don't confuse them with evidence, facts, and reason.
Well, it's follow the money, no question, and it is driving towards a lemming mentality, which is only going to pave the way for a new Marxist society, which is what the agenda is in the first place. But for our audience, they need to listen and tune in very, very carefully to what you're saying. And we now have this mandate here in Alabama. The governor just mandated that everybody wear a mask. That you are out in public wearing a mask. Now, I walk my dog 5 miles a day. Part of my physical well-being. It's interesting. In media, we're about the most isolated people you can possibly imagine. I have a relationship with a camera, and behind a wall is a producer. And Jason and I are very close and been together for 6 years, but I don't see him. We don't make eye contact. I have an earpiece, and if he needs to get a message to me, I'm going to hear his voice. But the social interaction in my life has been curtailed. So here I am. I'm out walking in neighborhoods in the surrounding area, and I see other people walking their dogs, and we have this mask requirement. Well, I don't see how walking outdoors I need a mask. So I'm not going to wear a mask when I walk my dog. I'm out in nature. I'm out in the moving air. I'm not having contact with people. You see somebody walking their dog, you naturally keep your dogs apart. You don't necessarily, unless you know the dog and you know the owner, you don't necessarily let your dogs. So you have that distancing. That's almost all the social interaction I have. Although I see you face to face, and that's a connection point, there's a screen and a camera between us.
Sure.
Now, I've lived in this world for a very long time, and I've lived in the world that even when I speak before large audiences, which was, I did 250 of those a year up until March, that was my model. I was out almost every night in a church. I was out speaking in church. But that still wasn't a social connection. It was me on a podium and 7,000 or 8,000 people in an audience, and then a book signing, and you were done. There was no real connection. I have a couple of very small group of core families that make up my board that I will do family events with. But my family is dispersed throughout the country. I don't have any close family. My daughter's 4 hours away, so I'm kind of used to this world. Author, academic, teacher, those kind of things. But for those who are the quote-unquote social, really, and I know some people that are so social, it's almost absurd. They're out to dinner every night. They're out doing it. It's almost an overcompensation for the fact that they cannot be alone.
Yeah, there are people like that. That's true. But that's fear-driven, not love-driven when it's that way.
That's exactly right. Now, here we are in this environment, and people are trying to make sense of it. Is this fostering a civil disobedience? Is this fostering an environment where I need to exert my individuality? Am I wearing a mask to protect me, or am I wearing a mask to protect you?
Or protect nobody and just give people a psychological sense of security when it doesn't do anything.
how do we process this in our brains when this is it's a challenge to the reason center in my brain that says that I grew up during the polio years.
Yes.
I wasn't isolated. I went to public school.
Well,
Kid,
you just brought up a brilliant point. Think about this COVID compared to some of the other diseases we have had to deal with in society. Do you understand that the data suggests it's 99.85% or something like that or more complete recovery from this virus? They don't tell you that the death rate from this is so small. And so they tell you, well, we have this many more new positive cases. Okay, so what does that mean, though? Is that clinically relevant? It's not clinically relevant if it doesn't require hospitalization. If you're not being hospitalized but you're positive, I will tell you my wife got COVID-19. She stayed at home, did her duty, isolated for 14 days. She has had the flu in the past. In her experience, the flu was actually made her feel worse than this, but she had fatigue, she had headache, she lost smell and taste for 2 days, and she was very, very tired for 2 weeks, but she had a fever for 1 day. She's better now. So she's a positive case, but it's not clinically relevant. It didn't cause any lasting harm. It's no more significant than when she's had the flu in the past. That also disrupted her ability to function for a couple of weeks where she didn't go to work and she felt cruddy. But the point being is, it's a sickness. It interferes with function in that sense, but it's not relevant to the larger society that she had that. She wasn't a danger. She wasn't a threat. But what we've done is we've taken this illness that 99.8 or 99.9% of people get well from, and we've created this sensation, this idea that just having the positive diagnosis is something to terrorize people with.
so we've done a couple of things.
A more rational approach would be to identify those at risk, like nursing home people and people with serious medical illnesses, already with medical illnesses, and take precautions to limit their exposure, and the rest of society really doesn't have a lot to worry about.
Is the brain, do we know enough about the brain to know how it responds to antigens and kicks our immune system into drive? I've never had the flu. My mother's never had the flu. And we've never had a flu shot. So I'm almost 69 years old. I've never had the flu.
You know, there are people that are walking around that are COVID positive that don't get sick from it. Not everybody gets sick. When smallpox, before it was eliminated, there was a subset of the population that never got sick from smallpox. In the human genome, there's enough variability that not every virus actually will cause. At the HIV people, remember that they identified these people who were HIV positive, but they never got AIDS. They never got sick from it. But they were carriers who infected other people, and they didn't even know it because they never got sick. And so within the population, there's always people that have immune systems that seem to be resilient and don't really get sick from the viruses that can actually kill other people. That's always true as well. But then your baseline general health, your vitamin D levels, for instance, vitamin D is what your body uses to help fight viruses. You have low vitamin D, you're more prone to infection. There's a lot of variables that can impact a individual, including their genetics, vulnerability to viruses. But then the communicability of the virus itself is also a variable, and the virulence of the virus.
These are such contemporary and important issues that I want to be sure that we cover them correctly. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back from break, we're going to revisit this with Dr. Jennings, put it into a biblical construct of how we can not be an instrument of the enemy, but we can be an ambassador of love and healing and look at the author of this, not of this virus, but of the fear that so many people are exhibiting over it, and the societal paralysis that it's driving us towards. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Igniting a Nation is expanding across the globe and healing the nations with the Word of God. As we expand our television ministry, we have added new Apple and Android apps, along with new streaming platforms including Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio. Your support keeps us broadcasting live interviews and teachings to cover every challenge facing a believer in these perilous yet prophetic times. In appreciation for your support, we are offering you a special gift. For any donation of $100 or more, we will send you a signed copy of Rabbi Eric Walker's best-selling biblical thriller, The Codist, and The 7 Laws of Abundant Living. You can give online via ignitinganation.com or by check mailed to Igniting a Nation, 115 Brook Highland Cove, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. Make sure to claim your special offer, IAN 2020. Help us keep reaching the uttermost corners of the earth with the good news of Messiah.
Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Timothy Jennings, noted psychiatrist and expert on militarily, as he shared with you his training, of the impact of this current COVID-19 response, masks, isolation, and the agenda of the enemy, the author of fear, who is got a stronghold on the globe right now that few are calling out. As a matter of fact, yesterday it was announced that Andy Stanley of North Point Community Church in Atlanta has closed the church until January the 1st of 2021 in response to the COVID-19 virus. When the church shutters their doors in fear, then you know that Satan's power is on the rise. Dr. Timothy Jennings, welcome back to the program.
Eric, thanks for having me. And it's not only voluntary shutting of the doors. I understand California has prohibited houses of worship from meeting. Government is now closing, with the arm of the state, worship practices. A violation of the first liberty of our Constitution is now being overridden. This is quite serious stuff for any persons who are understanding the end of time. What does it say at the end of time? Satan will be like a roaring lion. Now, when lions roar, what are they designed to cause people to feel, or the prey to feel? Fear. Isn't that what they're designed to do? He's roaring, trying to cause us to be frightened, so we freeze. We stop reacting and fulfilling our mission. And so I can see this roaring lion sending these worldwide messages that just are ginning up the fear in everyone.
So, from a mental health, and I'm desperately concerned about mental health in response to COVID-19. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association, and one of the things that I've done during this COVID-19 is I've made a personal visit with many of my neighbors, many of them, encouraging people to talk over the fence. As a matter of fact, there's a 7-acre tract of land, which is a Homeowners Association common area, that for many years was not maintained. And I was elected president of the HOA, and I said one of the things on my agenda is to clear that land and turn it into a walking track, turn it into a dog run, turn it into a place where people can go in the neighborhood, just walk to it and walk these 7 acres and beautiful nature, and there's a stream, and there's homes that back up to it, but all the fences are open fences because people enjoyed seeing the deer, they enjoyed seeing the rabbits and the wildlife. And so It doesn't have an access way except through the yard which I share. It goes between my house and my next door neighbor's house. So we announced that we are opening that pathway up to say, come, walk on our property. Where other people would say, stay off our property, we're saying use it to access this area. And we're starting to see older couples out walking and using this area. I went out and bought a tractor, and I actually mow it and clear it every 2 weeks so that it is usable. I do that for me as much as I do it for them. I enjoy that time, that solitude. I also like to see when I've accomplished a task.
Sure.
Mowing a field, you can, when you get to the end you look back and you say, wow, it looks so much better. You can see your work. And so I'm trying to foster those kind of things, and I think that we need to foster those kind of activities in our neighborhoods and in our communities. But people are so afraid. They are so desperately afraid of this virus. And when we operate in fear, and you and I have discussed this before, but not in terms of this particular fear, the brain responds to fear in a specific way. It releases things which are not beneficial for
long-term health.
Long-term health and developing of a strong immune system. They actually are in opposition to, they're destructive to a healthy balance. Walk us through that so we understand that if we choose, I don't like haunted houses. I don't like roller coasters. I don't like water slides. I don't like, I got a pilot's license because I didn't like that negative G-force of falling. So I wanted to be able to control that. So I took a plane up and I would stall the plane. And I would try to stall and go as fast as I could down before I knew the 1, 2, 3 to right the trajectory of the plane until I could create my own negative G-force that I could control, knowing that it wasn't going to bring me harm. Because I did so much international travel, it happened so many times, and it petrified me. I had this death grip. And I realized that this fear of falling was something that I could do something about. So I went out and got a pilot's license, and they would say, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to go do stalls for the next 3 or 4 hours. And I'm going to talk to the tower. Give me clearance to go to 10,000. Give me clearance to go to 12,000. Okay? I want to stall and I want to fall as far as I can to create this. Now, you understanding me after many years of talking to me, understand how my brain works a little bit, is that I'm not going to let anything master me, since the master has empowered me to have authority over that which causes me fear. So I'm going to confront my fears and I'm going to talk about my fears. This negative response that the brain releases when we go into the grip of fear, what happens to us and what can we do to seize control of it by the application of faith in the face of fear?
That's a great question. So first, when we become frightened, the brain will activate the stress circuit, the amygdala, which will send a signal to our adrenal glands to give us a shot of adrenaline. And so everybody knows that fight or flight response reaction in the acute, immediate situation. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, blood is shunted out of your digestive organs into your muscles. You start breathing faster and deeper, oxygenating things. Glucose is starting to be pumped into your bloodstream because you need energy for fight or flight. This is the immediate response to take care of an urgent, immediate circumstance situation. That is adaptive when there's a immediate threat. You see your child stepping out into traffic, you get that shot of adrenaline, you act really quick, grab him and pull him just before the car hits him. Okay, that's adaptive. You don't want to respond to that with, you know what, I probably ought to do something about that. No, you need a quick, immediate response, okay? That, and then once the crisis is over, everything turns off, everything relaxes, you go back to normal. There's no real long-term negative from that. The long-term negative from fear, which is not an acute threat that you respond to and resolve, the chronic fear keeps that amygdala firing, keeps the signal going, keeps the adrenal glands kicking out stress hormones of various kinds, keeps the heart rate high, keeps the blood pressure high, keeps inflammatory, turns on your immune system, which begins releasing inflammatory factors, which will chronically, for chronic stress, damage the various body tissues, damages the insulin receptors in our body. So we develop insulin resistance. This drives type 2 adult onset diabetes, obesity, high cholesterol, leads to early deaths from heart attacks and strokes. It also can interfere with normal brain connections and synaptic signaling, so we can have fatigue and malaise and fogginess and concentration problems chronically, increases our risk of dementia as we age. This is the long-term consequence. Also, immediately though, when you become quite anxious or stressed or frightened, fearful, it redirects your focus away from the altruistic brain circuits freeze and your survival brain circuits activate, and you're interested primarily with self, not with other people. Our reasoning, thinking, problem-solving circuits become impaired, and we become more aggressive. We see that we must fight our way out of the situation. And so instead of reasoning with people, we can become more hostile and conflictual with people. And you'll see this in mobs and things like this. They become very animated emotionally, but they become less reasonable as they become more of a mob. Peaceful protesters have great history in Christianity. Martin Luther, the great reformer, protested. That's where Protestant comes from. But he protested by nailing a thesis on a wall. And he protested by presenting evidence and truth. And he protested by engaging people, asking them to review evidence, to think for themselves, to draw conclusions. His namesake, Martin Luther King Jr., protested in the same way. He put out great oratory, books, speeches with truth that was seeking to persuade people, to convert people to a new way of understanding and practicing healthier methods, because these reformers had truth on their side. When people don't have truth on their side, they don't want reason, they don't want engaging, they don't want converting, they want conforming. And so they will then use intimidation methods, and they will use fear tactics to freeze thinking and just raise threats. And then we're reacting to threats that we have to do this to protect ourselves, but we're not reasoning anymore. And you'll see the big difference between a genuine peaceful protester and somebody who's got another agenda, because the peaceful protester always wants you to reason and think and persuade you with good, solid evidence and truth.
I'm very concerned about the government's overreach into the right to assemble. When they
not just assemble, practice religion.
Practice.
We have the right to assemble, but we also have the right to freedom of worship.
Absolutely. The California decision that you can't sing should have been a shot over the bow, and I would have.
And the ruling yesterday was houses of worship are closed in California. You cannot meet by law now.
It's an incredible overreach, and I don't, and maybe I don't know where to go to find it, but I don't see the voices.
Well, May 29, 2020, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that it was legal for the states to restrict religious practice. It was the 4 liberal justices with John Roberts ruling that the states have the right to restrict religious practice as long as it's a general rule across society. The 4 conservative justices dissented and said that general societal activities like ball games or concerts do not have special constitutional protection that religion does, and religion should not be included in with these general societal practices. But the court ruled, new precedent, May 29, 2020, constitutional for the state to restrict our religious practice. We lost huge religious liberty on May 29.
Well, we know from a scriptural standpoint that the son of perdition, the lawless one, is going to come. That these are signs that we are moving toward. But part of the most troubling, and I'm actually doing a commentary on it today is the weaponization of shame. And what we're seeing in these protests is the weaponization of shame. And you would want to believe that as a believer that we would recognize that this is wrong, but we've been practitioners of it. As a matter of fact, I did a survey of church signs. You find this interesting. A survey of church signs that mentioned the name Rahab. And in 100% of all church signs that mention the word Rahab, the name Rahab, it is connected to the harlot. Now, you and I both knowing the Bible, she was the first Corrie ten Boom in the history of Scripture. This was a woman to be honored and revered for putting her life on the line to protect the spies. But here we are, 3,500 years, 4,000 years later, we will not let her off the hook for her past transgressions before she became the Rahab, the mother of Boaz, in the line of Jesus. Today, 2020, we still have church signs, all of them. When there's a sermon about Rahab, it is about Rahab the harlot. We have been harbingers of shame, peddlers of shame, for the entire time Christianity has existed. We've used shame as a weapon. We did it to Samson. I've heard messages about Samson committing suicide. He left this life of debauchery, and in his final act of suicide, was by God empowering him to create the single largest death of the Philistines, the enemy of Israel, to pave the way for Samuel and for the rise of the Jewish people to survive against an enemy that was much greater and stronger. And Jesus referred to this as says, no greater gift than this than for one man to lay down his life for another. But we've been shaming Samson for thousands of years. We have created a Christian culture of shame as a weapon of faith. And it is, this movement on the street is the peddling and the marketing of shame for what generations ago was done to a people group, what is seemingly being shamed into responding the way they want us to respond.
I want to validate everything you just said and add another layer to it. With shame, as with guilt, there is what we call appropriate shame, the shame that we feel when we've actually done something wrong and we're ashamed. Okay, so Rahab may have felt ashamed while she was practicing prostitution. I think Samson could have felt ashamed when he told his secret to Delilah in the beginning and didn't stay faithful to the Lord. Okay, but there's redemption from that shame. And there's redemption that because Christ took the shame and nailed it to the cross, right, despising the shame. Okay, so but there's another type of shame and guilt, and that is false shame and false guilt. When we feel shame and guilt because we've accepted a lie that's not true. Shame based on lies. And this movement that's shaming people today isn't really based, much of it, on individual actual sins or mistakes. It's based on claims and allegations and name calling. And most of the time it's not true, but people accept the lie. And when they accept the lie, then they accept the shame. And Satan is the father of lies. You have to speak truth. What's the truth here? And it's not, and say, well, they'll take historical wrongs by other people and other generations and try to apply it to people that never participated and try to create a sense of shame. It's shameful.
Well, it is, and it's interesting. We apply a standard on other people that God does not apply to us, and I'll tell you exactly where it says. It says that God visits the iniquities of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate him. But for those who love him, he pours out his blessings to 1,000 generations. So if I go back to 1865 and I go forward 4 generations, okay, those generations are passed away.
Well, not only that, let me clarify what I think that there's. If you bring Ezekiel in, if you remember, will the guilt of the father pass to the son? Oh
Right.
no, the guilt of the father's the father's. The son will not be responsible for the guilt of the father. So there's a difference between guilt and iniquity. Iniquity, and now if you look at epigenetic science, if you commit sin, do a bunch of drugs, just whatever, harm your body, or many different things, you epigenetically alter your gene expression, and that gene expression passes down 3 and 4 generations. Our iniquities, our bad, sinful living change us biologically and epigenetically, and we pass those down to our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren before the epigenetic and the methyl groups that attach to the genes, causing the gene expressions change and free themselves. It'll pass down 3 and 4 generations because God made us in his image to have children in our image. So we do this to our kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. That's the iniquities passing down. But God, merciful, passes down 1,000 generations. But the guilt, see, we may inherit biological vulnerabilities to alcoholism if our dad was an alcoholic. But if our dad was a drunk driver that killed somebody, we have no guilt for his conduct. Right. And that's what many people misunderstand in this culture today, that we don't pass guilt down to the generations. We may inherit vulnerabilities and weaknesses if our parents participated in sinful activities, but not guilt and not responsibility for the sin.
This is why I love our conversations, not only as you as a psychiatrist, but as a theologian and someone who can follow my brain as it tangentially looks at all the different aspects of this. There are important biblical concepts at play here that also are indelibly connected with our mental health and our brain function. And you are one of the very few that has pulled all this together and really revealed to us the significant long-term, short-term, overall term effects of these things in our walk with the Lord, in our understanding of this temple of God, and understanding the brain to the point where I don't have to go to college to become the doctor you are, but we can have these conversations and we can shed light. And it is to provoke people to think for themselves in regards to their mental health, to things they're doing, things that they are espousing to others to do, and are they perpetuating these kind of things without understanding. So I thank you for helping to break this down so that our audience can connect and understand with some of these truths that I know they're wrestling with. I've had these conversations with people. They don't understand, they don't get it, and you and I help solidify this understanding. So I thank you for your friendship. I thank you for your contribution to our program, and I always learn something new, and it's always great to speak with you. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Eric.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.